Oh, goody.
Alright, what's up everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. In this one, I wanted to talk about Varden a little bit, as Varden had a change done recently, kind of our first major character ability and item rework in Mercenaries, and I thought it was something worth talking about. I don't think anyone expected Varden to get changed in the way that they did get changed. I know that Cold Snap here was really proving to be a pretty big problem. It was just happening way, way too often on turn 2 and just locking people out of the game. So I think when most people thought, hey, maybe they'll change something about Varden, they expected Cold Snap to be the thing that got changed, right? As that was doing what I would consider to be the most busted of the abilities. But a big reason why it was so busted is because of other frost scaling, be it from Jaina or Localar, and the bigger reason is the fact that a lot of the times on turn 2, this was paired up with Valera, so it was going off at 2 speed, and Varden would get a slow off on turn 1. So even if you had fast abilities like a Grom Slam to try and counter it and do a little speed tie to stop it from happening on 2 speed, you're going to be at 4 speed unless you're sped up with your own Valera. And even then, it would basically just be a tie. So, yeah, that's kind of what I thought was going to get changed. However, that is not what actually got changed. I think they changed Varden in a way that nobody really saw coming, but after playing with Varden since the changes and playing against Varden since the changes, they've had a very big impact on how the character works in PvP especially. So first change that they made was Flurry, right? Flurry, what it used to do was it used to only target opposing mercenaries, so it could not hit summons, and it would hit everything, 5 speed, 7 damage each, all that's the same, and slow them for 2. However, now it shoots 3 missiles total at random enemies, so that can hit summons, that can hit regular mercenaries, and a big change about this, it can hit the same character more than once, and it can totally not hit other characters at all. So you can stack up that speed slowing. If you happen to hit a character 2 or 3 times, they're going to be 4 speed or 6 speed slower. But the big thing about this that it really messes with is now you cannot as easily or consistently do cold snap math, at least the turn beforehand. Before, it was very easy to calculate how much damage you were doing with Varden and where that damage was going to go. And so because of that, and you knew where the slows were going to land as well. So because of that, it was very easy to calculate getting characters down to a point where Valera, Belinda, and Varden, or whatever other combination of characters you had with Varden, could get that nice turn to snap off. And with how this ability was changed, it now you can still snap very consistently a lot of the time, but the thing is you can't be planning it out with Varden, and Varden could actually potentially mess up how you want to go for a snap on turn 2 because the missiles don't go where you want them to on turn 1. So that really changed quite a bit. It's been a very impactful change. It has not made the character terrible or anything, and in some instances it can be better. Like if you have Varden as one of your last units, now this can all hit the same character. Whereas before, Varden was really bad if you had them as one of your last, if you didn't have any other frost scaling, because you would just hit the mercenaries, and if there was only 1 or 2 left, you were missing out on damage essentially, which now you won't anymore. You'll get more slows. So I think they did an interesting job with that one and changing it to be still powerful, but making the character less consistent. And I think the consistency of Flurry was a big part of what led to a lot of these snaps on 2. Now, snaps on 2 still happen. Frost Valyria is still a deck, but I've seen it significantly less since the balance patch. That's probably for a multitude of reasons. It's not just Varden getting changed. It has to do with other characters getting buffed up as well. But from playing with Varden, the change to Flurry has definitely, especially in pure Frost comps, like ones that aren't running Valyria, the change has been very noticeable because you can still plan out cold snaps and whatnot, but you can't be doing it a turn ahead of time because you don't know where those Varden rolls are going to hit, so you can't like preemptively start doing that math. So I thought that was rather interesting. Again, I don't think anyone expected Flurry of all things to get changed on the character, but in a way, changing Flurry has also impacted Cold Snap. So while I personally would have liked to see maybe a swapping of the cooldowns between Cold Snap and Ice Lance potentially, because I do think Cold Snap on 1 is still a little busted. But the bigger thing about that is it's not that Cold Snap is happening, it's that Cold Snap, when it happens on 2 speed or less than 2 speed, is busted. And that's more of a problem with Valyria, who I would not be surprised if she was eventually subjected to a similar rework as Varden. Now, that wasn't the only change that Varden got. Varden's Chilling Amulet item was also changed. So, Chilling Amulet, before, I believe it was an 8 damage death rattle. They upped the damage all the way to 14, so it's a buff in damage. However, the freeze effect on it is now notably worse. So before, the text was freeze an enemy until the end of next turn. Now it is just freeze a random enemy. That's a very, very big difference, because part of what made Varden such a pain to kill before was if you killed their Varden before all your characters had acted, Varden had a chance to kind of 2-for-1 you, where their death rattle could freeze your character, prevent them from acting that turn, and then the turn after they're dead, your character can't act again. And if there's one thing we've noticed in playing Mercenaries PvP, it is that anytime you can prevent an opposing character from acting for a turn, you are doing something very powerful. Because we only have 3 mercenaries out, so you're literally preventing a third of your opponent's whole game plan for that turn. So that's really huge. We've seen it time and time again, and Varden's freeze death rattle was a huge, huge reason why it was very risky to kill off Varden sometimes, because if Varden 2-for-1'd you, it was just very, very hard to come back from. And it wasn't really something you could easily play around, because the only way you play around it is you either have Ragnaros on the field, or you could swap him in, I guess, or you just don't kill the Varden. And I don't think that is the kind of interactivity they want to have in the game. So I was very happy to see this change. It is nice that they gave the death rattle a bit more oomph in terms of damage to make up for it. And it's not useless by any means, because, it can still deny an action for a turn, but now you're not guaranteed that anymore. And I think that is the philosophical change they're trying to make for Varden here, is that they don't want this character to be as consistent as it was in what it is doing. And it kind of fits in the theme with Frost that we've seen, especially since we've gotten Localar here, as recently they talked about different tribes and what the aims of those tribes are. And my personal kind of theory on another reason why we got the Varden change the way that we did is that I think they're okay with Frost being a powerful scaling comp. The problem is when you always know where you're directing that scaling. Like we saw, Localar is insanely powerful, but his arguably most powerful ability here, Hailstorm, it's a roll of the dice, pretty much. You don't know where those hailstorms are going to go and all that kind of stuff. So my guess here is that that's kind of the philosophy they want to incorporate with Frost. So I don't think we're going to get Frost units anytime soon, more of them at least. But when we do eventually get more Frost units, it would not surprise me if they do have a lot of damage or scaling abilities like we've seen on the previous ones. However, I think we're going to see more of the random elements become a core part of what Frost does to kind of offset the fact that they are very high in power level. Localar, I mean, his randomness definitely matters. Sometimes it is very good for you, sometimes it is not good for you. And I think that's kind of their way of balancing around how powerful they are. Now, that being said, I do still think Localar is one of the few characters who could do with a nerf, but since the Trigor meta has came about, I've actually been seeing a lot less Localar. Don't get me wrong, you can still run Frost and be successful with it, no doubt about that, but Localar definitely is kind of weak to Trigor because of the randomness of Hailstorm. You know, you are unfavored to hit only the Trigor. It's more likely your Hailstorm is probably going to hit some of those side units, and that will eat Localar up very quickly. So I don't know if that was an intentional part of the buff to Trigor, but it has definitely resulted in less Localar. That is for sure. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The other big thing about this Varden nerf, and this will be kind of the last main thing I talk about here, is that this Varden nerf sets a precedent. And this kind of solves a problem we were theorizing about in terms of balance updates for mercenaries, right? So we got an initial buff patch, but that came very, very long time ago, and we weren't sure if we were really going to get more of those. We did get one recently, which is awesome, and I hope we do see more buff patches in the future, as I want more of the launch mercenaries to be playable. You know, I think that some of them are fine for PvE, but there's no harm in bumping them up a little bit to make them PvP viable, and I think it's just a net win for everybody for the most part. Like, we have more playable characters without them having to actually design new mercenaries right away. So I think that would be really great. There are definitely some characters I would like to see buffed. But the bigger thing is, we've talked about nerfs before on the podcast and the idea of nerfs. And Hearthstone has set a lot of precedents, and while Mercenaries doesn't always follow the precedents previously established in Hearthstone, one of the most kind of core precedents of Hearthstone that's been around since the very beginning has been, if a card gets nerfed in Standard or Wild or what have you, it is eligible for a full dust refund. That has been a thing pretty much since the beginning of the game, and it is one thing players are very accustomed to. So because in Mercenaries, how the currency works is so different, and because it is a much larger time commitment, we theorized that there would not be any major nerfs or changes to OP characters until we got some kind of solution for the excess coin problem. And then at that point, presumably there'd be some kind of thing they could do to refund you, because unlike in Standard or Wild, refunding me coins isn't going to do anything, because as we can see, I have 7,500 Varden coins, and it takes 2,700, I believe, to get a character from no abilities to fully maxed. So I have like 3 times that, and so I'm not gonna go disenchanting my rare for a full refund of 100 coins or whatever it is, when I already have a couple thousand for them. So we were saying, you know, what would be the kind of compensation if they nerfed a character? And I think Varden answered that question and kind of gives us an idea of what to look towards in the future, what to expect. And I think it's a good way generally of going about it, because they need to be able to rein in a character if it is overpowered. We've seen before, I actually got a response in one of the past Ixar AMAs about, hey, are nerfs on the table for mercenaries? And they did say yes, they are on the table. They'd rather introduce new stuff, or I guess also buff old stuff now, it seems, as a way to change things and prevent one or two characters from being overly dominant in the metagame, which is all fine and good, but eventually there are going to be some problems with characters that cannot be easily solved with those methods sometimes. And I think Valeera is a great example of one of those problems. And I do think eventually she will probably get the same treatment as Varden did here. But the great thing about this is Mercenaries has so many more elements about it to a character that you can tweak compared to something like Standard with cards. Because generally, you see one of two changes on a card when it gets nerfed. You either see the mana cost go up in value, or some kind of change is made to the text. But a lot of the times, it's usually the card going up in cost. Now, in Mercenaries, there's just so much you can do, and we saw that with this Varden rework. They didn't decide to change any of the speeds or any of the cooldowns or anything like that, but they changed specifically this first ability very significantly, where it doesn't even play like the same skill. Like it's a totally new skill in a lot of ways. Like, yeah, they kept the damage and the slow aspects, but it plays so differently. It feels like a whole different skill entirely. And that's just off changing one single skill and leaving a lot of the other aspects of the character the exact same, and then changing the item kind of the same thing. You know, they gave it a little bit of a buff in the damage, but a nerf in the freezing. And I think this is a good way to generally do this. Like, I don't want them to Warsong Commander a mercenary, right? I don't want them to make a character that was good totally unplayable. No matter how crazy that character is, like Valeera or Localar. I don't want those characters to be so bad they're never used again. I just think they can be at a bit more of a reasonable power level to allow a bit more breathing room for other strategies to thrive. However, I am hopeful after the last kind of announcement we got around a week ago, where they said, you know, we still will be getting updates in the patches between the big drops, specifically balanced stuff. I am hopeful that we might see buffs a little bit more often, not have to wait, you know, like 6 months in between character buffs. So that would be great, and I hope we see more reworks like this in the future when needed. Personally, I think a lot of the characters are really good in the meta right now. I'm happy with most of the buffs. I do think they pushed Trigor a little bit too far, but a bigger part of that is I think he's just lacking in some proper counters right now. We'll have to see if Murky does anything about that, but I don't think on his own he's really going to impact that. I'm probably going to do a separate video later this week, though, talking about Trigor's buffs in specific and my thoughts about that and all that good stuff. But I do think if there ever are more characters that they should give the kind of Varden treatment to, where they just do a bit of tweaking on a skill or a item or both, I think Localar and Valeera are 100% contenders, and realistically, they could probably also serve to knock Trigor back down just a touch. Even some simple stuff like not making him trigger when he dies, if other stuff took damage as he died, could be a way to rein him in a little bit without actually nerfing the character, really. But I do like the change to him. I do like that it has very much shaken up the meta. I just think it might be like Valeera a little much in the long term because of how powerful it is. So I still want him to be a playable character, but maybe he could be toned down just a little bit. And it's the same thing with Localar and Valeera. Want them to be playable, but I do think they are a little bit unhealthy for the game in the long term in their current states, and I would like to see a potential similar thing to Varden done with them. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. I just thought this was a really interesting thing to talk about, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on, you know, like I said in the beginning, I don't think anyone expected these kind of changes to Varden, but I do think they have generally been pretty well received. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about that. So feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll definitely be active in the comments talking about all this kind of interesting stuff, because this is a very interesting precedent for Mercenaries, and personally I think it's a very positive one to set. We now know what we can kind of expect, where if they think a character is too dominant or too meta warping, what tools they have in their arsenal to change it to kind of make it a better experience for the players, hopefully. So that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.